Hey guys, so in this video, we're going to be looking at the Drift Animate settings. Now, right now I'm going to be looking at the Drift Animate stack, but these same exact settings are in Drift Pro as well. So for all intents and purposes, this video is exactly the same for both Drift and Drift Pro. Okay, so let's dive in. Right now, we're going to be animating, such as a lot of these demos, is this little green box. Okay, this is the same file that you get when you download Drift. This is the demo file. So right now, we're going to be animating this little green square. Now, what you noticed is when I flipped to preview, this square went from a particular position to its natural resting place on the web page. And that's exactly what at the top here, we have direction. We have animating from and animating to. So by default, you're animating from a location to an element's natural location. So this green square's natural location is right there. Okay. If we go ahead and change some of these, let's change this to animate from 400 pixels. Okay. You'll see that when the page loads, it's going to animate from that location to its final resting place, to its natural place. Now, if we do a to animation, what this does is on page load, this is going to animate from its natural location to the location that we have defined here inside the settings. So now let's go ahead and look through some of these settings. Let's go ahead and reset some of these just to 0, just for fun, so we can kind of see what each one is individually. And what's kind of nice about this, playing around, please go ahead and play around with these while you have preview open, because as I change these settings, you're going to see what that setting does live inside the preview. Okay. So if you'll notice, move X obviously is going to move something horizontally, whereas move Y is going to move it vertically. You'll also notice that we have a percentage and a pixel settings here. What the percentage is, if I set this to be 100%, it's going to move horizontally the same distance as the width of the element itself. So this particular green square moved exactly its width over. Now, if I did it 200%, it would move 200% the width of that square. And then obviously, if we have pixels, that's going to move a particular number of pixels. So if I wanted to move 200% plus 10 pixels, we can do that as well. So that is going to be 200%, which is 2 times the width of the actual thing that we're animating, plus 10 pixels. This gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of movement and how we want to move things across the page. Now, obviously, I can do this with horizontal as well. Let's say I want to move this 50 pixels. So here we go. It's going to move down. Now I have overflow visible turned on here, or sorry, overflow hidden. So it's kind of getting hidden here. Okay. But there we go. It is going to move 200 pixels plus 10 and then 50 pixels down. Now you can do negative pixels here. So if I did negative 50, it's going to move up. Same thing. You can also do negative on the percentages. So in terms of moving left and right, it's just doing positive versus negative numbers. So scaling. In terms of this, we can scale across the x-axis and the y-axis. So if I said we're going to scale to 2, what we'll notice here is, now this looks okay because this is an HTML element. If this were an image, it would stretch that image out, right? So normally if you want to scale something, normally you want to scale it uniformly. So if you're going to scale the x-axis, you're also going to scale the y-axis. But you can scale them individually if you want. Oh, interesting. I scaled X to 0, which basically makes it disappear. So instead, if we wanted to scale just the X-axis, that would, curious what would happen if we go negative here. Oh, it kind of makes it flip. Very interesting. I actually never tried that before. Okay, so let's set these back to 1. Okay, What is skewing? So skewing allows us to, or let's just do it. Here we're doing degrees. So if we did like 45 degrees, what that does is that skews across the x-axis, which is horizontally. And then we can also skew vertically as well. Oh, well, rotating, skewing on the x and y-axis, or on the y-axis 45 degrees with x 45 degrees makes it disappear, which is interesting. But if we did like 90 degrees, I think that kind of makes it disappear as well. Okay, which is interesting. What happens if we go skew 90, 90? Oh, check that out. That's kind of crazy. Right? So play around with these to kind of give us an idea of what you might want. Right? What does 180 do? Oh, interesting. So there we go. Play around with these. The utility of skewing is, I think, better for like small numbers. Like I'm going to skew something by 5 degrees, right? And it kind of makes it just a little off kilter, right? So there we go. Rotating is pretty obvious. It's going to rotate something. So here I'm still moving this just so we can get a little bit of more movement. But if I rotate this by, let's say, 360 degrees, it's going to move and rotate at the same time. Right? If you wanted to see, we can obviously, not have any move, and we could just rotate something in place. And if you did, again, negative degrees, that will rotate the opposite direction. But you can also not do 360. You could do something like, 45 degrees. And that just rotates it 45 degrees. And lastly is the opacity setting. So we're going to animate to, let's say 20%. And that animates here. Let's do, let's still move it a width. So it's going to, here we're moving and it's rotating and it's adjusting the opacity to 20%. Now remember, all of this is going to be 2 actions. We can do all of these same from the from actions as well. Okay. So next up is, I skipped over it, but there is a 3D button here. And this changes the types of animations that we can do. And what you'll notice is that we get a few additional options here. So here we have Move Z and we have Perspective. Now, what is perspective? Perspective is basically, think of it as the number of pixels that you are away from the actual screen. Okay, so the closer you are to something, the more potentially 3D that animation is going to look. Just as if you were standing far away from something versus close to it. You can kind of see how things differ. So another difference here is in the rotate. This is where we can now rotate something based off the X, Y, and Z axes. The Z axis is the traditional rotate where something just kind of spins. But now that we have access to rotating on the X and Y axis, okay, we can actually get a much different look. So you see there, it kind of gives us a 3-dimensional look. Let's go ahead and change this perspective. Let's change it to 300. You kind of see how that looks versus if we were to make it 1000, how much different that animation looks, right? Oh, I made that 100. Oops, I meant to make it 1000. But that's actually drastic. Going from 100 to 1000, the angle is much, much greater. It's a much more exaggerated animation when we're doing a lower perspective versus a larger perspective, which is something like you're standing farther away from the object. So lastly, let's just look at the timing options here. These are pretty apparent, right? We have delay, which is obviously going to delay our animation by a certain amount of seconds. And then duration is the duration of our animation. And obviously we can repeat. So if we wanted to repeat this animation 3 times, we could do that. You also have a delay between the animations. Another thing I should note is that if you set the repeat to -1, that essentially means infinite. Okay. And you'll also notice that the repeat will always restart from the beginning each time. If you wanted to animate and then go back and then kind of keep going back and forth, you'll want to turn on yo-yo animation. What that will do is that will cause the animation to go back and forth. And for a full overview of how easing works, make sure you check out our video on drift easing.